Watch. He had a dream, but has it been realized? On this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a special edition of Freedom Watch. Here for a frank and honest look at race in America, liberal Columbia professor Mark Lamont Hill, conservative activist Star Parker, libertarian John Mons, and radio host David Webb. Would Dr. King see President Obama and think his dream has become reality?
We will restore the dream for the next generation.
Or have blacks in America not gone far enough? Then, the Constitution and King. What were Dr. King's beliefs about natural rights? Plus, the black vote. Do Democrats deserve such a majority from blacks in America?
I want my freedom back.
All that and the unintended consequences of the drug war on the black community.
Police, open up! How much is there? How much is there?
John McWhorter from the Manhattan Institute is here saying, end the drug war and end the assault on young black men. Because tonight, we honor Dr. King, just as he honored these principles. That government is best which governs least. The people are entitled to a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. The Constitution was written to keep the government off the people's backs. Hill, Parker, Webb, Mons, McWhorter, Freedom Watch. The revolution continues now. Welcome to a very special Freedom Watch. Tonight on this day, we honor the great civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. We'll take a look at Dr. King's dream of freedom, peace, and mutual respect and the state of blacks in America today. What would Martin Luther King Jr. say about the state of blacks in America today? Would he lament the high incarceration and unemployment rates and the low rate of marriage? Or would he rejoice that today, 43 years after his death, the United States of America has a black president? With me now, Columbia University professor Mark Lamont Hill, conservative activist and columnist Star Parker, conservative radio talk show host David Webb, and libertarian activist John Mons. My friends, welcome to Freedom Watch. Professor Hill, let me start with you. Yeah. What would Martin Luther King think if somehow he could peer from wherever he is about the state of black America in 2011?
Well, I think on the one hand, he would celebrate the extraordinary amount of progress that we've seen. We have a black president, right. We have black CEOs, we have an expanded black middle class. But he would also look and see all the places where we haven't made progress. He would say that before he died, we had 150,000 people incarcerated, and now we have 2.5 million incarcerated, many of whom are black and brown, most of whom are black and brown. School dropout rates, high suicide rates, HIV/AIDS rates. He would look at all these things and say, what can we as a nation do to continue to move the ball forward and not just celebrate progress?
John Mons, is some of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. probably would lament, whether you agree with Professor Hill or not, the cause of the government trying to keep black Americans dependent upon the government not doing enough to enhance freedom rather than dependency?
Well, I think it'd be a little bit of both, not only what the government's doing currently, but also I think he'd be a little disappointed in how passive the black community has come when it comes to addressing some of the issues that we face, and also in the entire country and where we are as a society. I think a lot of the gains that we saw during his lifetime, they haven't been expanded upon. We seem to be a lot of folks are waiting for government to step in and provide solutions to issues instead of going out and being direct and holding government accountable.
Star, has the government created an atmosphere of dependency in America for large segments of the black community? And if so, hasn't that hurt rather than helped?
It has hurt. And what's interesting, during the civil rights movement that we're talking about, there were other phenomenon happening in our country to the civil rights movement. We had a war on poverty and a sexual revolution. And when you couple these two ideas, that you no longer have to think about personal decisions that you're making because we now have safety nets that have replaced personal responsibility, we did see an unraveling in the black community. Keep in mind now, here we are almost 50 years later, and the black poverty rate, which is what we were trying to work on, has not changed. As Mark said, that we have made tremendous progress. It is the best of times, the worst of times. because the black poverty rate, though, we should still be concerned about at 25%.
David Webb, why has the black poverty rate not changed in spite of or notwithstanding the billions of dollars that the government has given out?
Because the solution is not to throw money at it. The solution is for the community to empower itself, take its empowerment, and work within the American system. Martin Luther King would look at the great strides we've made, certainly the growth of the black community in some areas. But in one way, we've become entitled, and we're given our rights by the government in the entitlements and the overextension of affirmative action. In other areas that started out well and then went too far. So in a sense, you're waiting on government to do the job for you. And the promise of the government, it's not fulfilled because it can't be.
Does the government overpromise? Does the government try and keep either black individuals or black groups or black families dependent upon it so it can provide for them and they'll supply it with votes?
I don't think the government overpromises. If anything, I think they underperform. They don't live up to what they promise. And that's what Martin Luther King was all about, getting America to live up to its democratic
Do you
promise.
think that Martin Luther King wanted massive welfare programs, or if he wanted the society truly to be colorblind, where we didn't even look at people as black or white, but just as other human beings?
Well, the issue isn't colorblindness, first of all. The issue isn't to not see me as black. It's for being black to not be a social demerit.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed. You said it better than I did.
Yeah. So, but the question for Martin Luther King was not how can we move government out of the way, but how can the government be an ally to black people and white people and anyone else who needs it? Remember, the March on Washington was for jobs.
That's necessarily true. Because when you think about what his battle was against segregation, this was governmental policy put in place that he said remove these barriers. But what happened after his death?
But he wanted government-forced integration as well.
We're not sure. This happened after his death. We started seeing the politicization of the community after
he certainly
died.
wanted Jim Crow to go away. He certainly wanted official segregation to go away.
Right.
He certainly wanted the government to stop forcing lunch counters to segregate. Now, some of the segregation may have come about from the owner of the lunch counter, but some of it came about from the police in the streets.
These were government policies.
But he also
There's a difference
advocated
between desegregation and forced integration.
Right, but once the societal changes occurred, the community didn't advance itself because it became dependent in large part on government entitlements.
Okay,
so
John, do you agree with that once the law changed, Brown versus Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that blacks did not take advantage of those changes?
Well, yes, that's part of the problem. There's part of the struggle is for equal access to opportunity. And once those opportunities came about, once part of the government had gotten out of the way, then, like I mentioned earlier, we've become very passive. We've gone from being business owners to searching for jobs. When we talk about economic empowerment, as far as education, we've turned education over from a family responsibility to the government's responsibility. And when we do those things, they're going to be bad results. And it's a systemic thing that we need to get away from.
You are a professional educator, albeit at an Ivy League institution, not at a public school in an inner city America.
Right, but I've done that too, yeah.
Correct, and you observe education professionally. What is your view of the status of inner city education today, virtually all of which is administered by the government?
Right, that it's not, that its failure is not simply due to people who don't care, because this whole narrative that's circulating in this conversation has begun to be that black people got equal opportunity and didn't take advantage of it. I would argue that the opportunity has never been equal. Right now, the logic, the taken for granted assumption about public education is that districts that have more money and have higher property values will get more funding.
But
that's
people
a problem.
that care about their decisions, people that care about their children, people that care about the interest of their future are engaged in it. So there is a part of responsibility that we as people have to take.
It's not either or.
You have to take a break. I just want a last question to start.
It is either or in some situations.
We only have about 30 seconds. Would Martin Luther King Jr. be happy with the state of government-administered education in inner-city America today with respect to blacks?
I think we'll have the discussion about King and argue it through history to see where he would fall today. But that said, I believe that his movement was more for personal responsibility, but removing barriers.
So I want you to hold that disagreement until after the break. After this, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Constitution. Next. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech nearly 50 years ago, he longed to see a day when all would, quote, be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sounds like he's talking about natural rights, which are derived from our humanity, not from the government. With me now, staying with me now, Columbia University Professor Mark Lamont Hill, conservative activist and columnist Star Parker, conservative radio talk show host David Webb, and libertarian activist John Mons. David Webb, where do our rights come from?
They are our inalienable rights, and one of the big losses in the black community in the civil rights era, most black children were born to two-parent families, somewhere in the 75 to 80 percentile. Today, that is complete opposite. We have lost the familial relationship. We have lost the black father in the family, and it takes a man to raise a boy. That's a fact, and that is an important part of our community breaking down.
Professor Hill, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the greatest defenders of the natural law in modern times, from the idea that our rights come from our humanity, whether you want to argue it's biology, because we are thinking rational human beings, or theology, because we have an immortal soul and God infused that soul in us and made us in his image and likeness. Whichever you believe is the source of natural rights, he was a forceful presenter of it.
Yes, but he also endorsed governmental responsibility. He also endorsed legal rights. Remember, at 1963, August 28th, when he gives the I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. Let's not forget. So he has a political dimension to this. He's also arguing that he came to the nation's capital to cash a check. He said, I refuse to believe that the great vaults of democracy are empty. Right. He talked about poverty. He talked about issues that weren't just about natural rights.
And he ended that speech with go back
Let me get John in this. But when he said, I want to cash a check, John Mons, did he literally mean I want cash from LBJ? Or did he mean I want the government to create an atmosphere in which blacks can get jobs and be responsible?
Of course, he wasn't talking literally about a check from the government. And what he talked about in the speech, he used language, once again, invoking the Declaration of Independence. Also, he talked about letting freedom ring, being free at last. And Absolutely. Part of that is a respect for individual rights, and I think that's what he championed. Now, I think he had the best, one of the best ways of getting there, and that's confronting government who had created a system of laws that declared black people and people of color to be second-class citizens.
All right.
You know, he championed civil disobedience and disrespecting unjust laws.
Okay.
And we need to get back to that.
Thank you, John. He also argued, and this is great, I think, what John just said, that an unjust law is no law at all, and there is no obligation to obey it. And some of the laws that he fought against, it is hard to believe that these were laws enacted by city governments and state legislatures in the United States of America in the lifetime of all of us. So he risked breaking the law, was adjudicated as a lawbreaker, spent time in jail in order to get rid of those unjust laws. Can we do the same today?
Oh, now you're asking two different questions, and perhaps in light of some of the other discussions that are going on, we're looking for 9-letter words that nobody know what they really mean, so that they won't know that we're really angry at each other, since we now have to get nice to each other. Well, but in light of that, when you think about Dr. King, he was a preacher. Obviously, this country, it's premised on these ideas that there is a bigger law, that there is a natural law, that there are eternal truths that precede government. And you cannot then have government replace these eternal truths. They are supposed to secure our freedoms.
To go back to this point, in his speech, he spoke to the conscience of a nation. That's the inalienable rights. That's the structure we needed. He said, we need to look at our conscience. His speech was not aimed at the black community. It was aimed at the American community. From that, we advanced. From that, we got better. But we lost our way somewhere in there and became a political arm for one party versus a political arm for ourselves.
Professor Hill, last question in this category. It's the third rail of this, the Civil Rights Act of '64. Clearly, the federal government has the right to restrain the states when they are not complying with the 14th Amendment. Right. Does it have the right to regulate private property as well?
I say yes.
Where does that right come from?
I think that's... See, here's the problem. You all keep talking about natural rights as if human beings don't determine what constitutes a natural right. Any right is determined in social practice, whether it's natural, whether it's legal. Human beings decide what they mean. These are rules that we must decide upon as a community in order to move forward. If in private property or in public space, people are being discriminated upon, we as a government and as a community have a need to intervene.
When those rules restrict your ability to advance, you have to look at what is right over what is G-level.
And that's a perfectly fine opinion, just as in Kings.
Back in a minute. It's a statistical fact The overwhelming majority of blacks vote for Democrats. Does the Democratic Party deserve that kind of support? We get into politics next.